In the Oklahoman's video studio on this Friday, February 26th, it's the Week in Review. We take a look at some of the headlines that were in the newspaper, in the Oklahoman, and online at newsok.com, and some of the headlines that are upcoming in upcoming editions of the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com. Today we'll take a look at the presidential race, the debate that happened last night, some of the storylines coming up this weekend leading into Super Tuesday. The Joe Mixon tape, will it be released? Will it not be released? What's behind that story? The energy companies here in Oklahoma City, they dominate the employment numbers and they affect businesses in general. Don Mikoy will join us for analysis of that. And we'll take a look at the Oscar predictions. The Academy Awards are Sunday night. As I mentioned, Don Mikoy, business editor of the Oklahoman, joins us this week for the Week in Review. Don, thanks for your time. We appreciate that.
Glad to be here.
And star of stage and film in Hollywood, Philip O'Connor.
Thanks for the Philip part.
Joins us from the news desk, and I say that in jest and in love. Phil was on MSNBC this week as they rolled through town on their Super Tuesday coverage. You spoke with Chris Jansig, along with former Governor Frank Keating and current Mayor Mick Cornett. How'd that go?
It was good. I mean, it was interesting to hear their perspectives on the election, Tuesday's election. It's crazy in the Sooner State. You know, just a few days beforehand, I think it's still up in the air for the Democrats. Bernie Sanders has been closing the gap according to some of our latest polling. It does look like at this point Donald Trump is still in the lead on the Republican side and has stretched it out a little bit since we polled the last time. So, well,
let's talk about that a little bit. We had a new poll out this week about how Oklahomans feel in the presidential race, and Trump is still in the lead.
Absolutely, yeah, and not only just still in the lead, but seems to be, like I said, pushing that gap out a little bit. Rubio has moved into second place here. Cruz is right behind him in third. I think it was 29, 21, 20. So we've seen that numbers, you know, that Trump was in the lead in our last poll. When we first started, Ben Carson was in the lead, and he is nowhere to be seen anymore in the polling. So
he just wants people to attack him now.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're definitely down to a three-person race, maybe even just a one-person race.
Chris asked you a question on camera about voter turnout and interest here in the state. What are we seeing on that? What do we expect at the polls here on Tuesday?
Well, early voting started yesterday, and if that's any indication, we should have a fairly significant uptick in turnout, because we saw as many people vote on the first day of early voting yesterday as voted almost in the entire three-day period last time. So there is a big interest in this election, and that was part of the question. Was yes, Trump has certainly captured the attention of the electorate. Would he get them out to vote? We'll see, but right now the early indications are that people are going to come out and vote this time.
It'll be interesting to see how many people show up for Donald Trump's event here today. Presidential candidates have been making their stops through the state. There you see some B-roll of his previous visit. I believe that may have been at the state fairgrounds. Later tonight at 6 p.m. he's over at the Cox Convention Center. This afternoon, Senator Marco Rubio out of Florida will be over at the Chevy Bricktown Event Center. We will have coverage of both of those events. President Bill Clinton stopped in this past Sunday. You can watch that entire video. He spoke for about 30 minutes over at Northeast. He's coming back this weekend, right?
Right, and we may also see Ted Cruz come through town this weekend, and we may also see Bernie Sanders come into town maybe early next week. That hasn't been confirmed yet, but the rumors are pretty strong that both those guys are going to show up. We talked to some political experts about that, and in this race we've seen a lot of candidates make Oklahoma a stop, whereas in the last few elections, you know, they've tended to bypass the state for a number of reasons. Mostly they say because it's still so up for grabs, and so there is a chance here for candidates to make their mark, and for people like Rubio and Cruz, who absolutely need a win on Super Tuesday somewhere. I mean, they're going to fight here as much as they can. We
had some analysis with our man in Washington, Chris Castile, earlier this week, and he said Super Tuesday really could go a long way in shaking out how this race goes. It should be noted the delegates in Oklahoma, it's not an all-or-nothing state.
Right. It is proportional or whatever. So based on what the vote, what the vote totals are, they'll get a certain number of delegates based on that. That's true for both the Republicans and the Democrats.
About a dozen states in play on Super Tuesday. Did you guys watch the debate last night?
A little bit.
A little bit.
I did not.
Did not. It was on CNN, and it was a whole lot of, you mentioned the three candidates, Trump, Rubio, and Ted Cruz, kind of trying to talk over each other, but Cruz and Rubio ganging up on Mr. Trump.
Absolutely. If there was any question, or there was a lot of criticism that the two also-rans hadn't been turning their fire towards the leading candidate for whatever reason. Well, by gosh, they turned it on him last night, although he seemed to do a good job at batting away most of their attacks. So We did a poll this morning, just a reader survey, essentially asking people who they thought won the debate last night, and it was overwhelmingly people thought that Trump won that debate, 80%.
Yeah, those numbers are Trump, about 80%, followed by Rubio, Kasich in third. Cruz and Carson had about 37 votes, 1% earlier. My comment earlier about he just wants people to attack him, that was his quote last night during the debate, because the way these debates have been set up is if someone is mentioned in a rebuttal, if you will, they then get the floor. Yeah. Dr. Ben Carson was like, someone please attack me so I can speak here.
Yeah, I think the word of the night last night was gentlemen, trying to get them to stop talking over one another. So.
Hashtag gentlemen. All right, looking ahead, our Nolan Clay this weekend has taken a look at the TV spend, right?
Yeah, and we've heard, we'll see in Nolan's story, I think, that Bernie Sanders, again, has made a late push in Oklahoma with a lot of ad spending. His campaign was really sort of non-existent up until a couple weeks ago. Understand now that he's had quite a few people that have come into the state, paid political people to work the ground game for him. Hillary Clinton has already done ad buying here in the state, so again, unlike in past elections, we're seeing a little bit more of that kind of spending here in Oklahoma this time around.
And Don, that's typical on a business standpoint. TV stations, media companies, they do very well during an election year.
Oh yeah, it's money in the bank for them because they get to charge rates that are out of line with what they usually charge, and they love to see the politicians come in with their checkbooks.
Absolutely. Some other things we have coming up is a special look at a slice of Oklahoma City, a series called The Precinct.
Right. One of the things we wanted to look at this time was we were trying to figure out a way to tell the story of the election in a unique way. And so we decided that we would focus on one precinct that a lot of the political experts that we talked to said was indicative of sort of a slow change that's been happening in Oklahoma City and in the metro core, where precincts, districts that have traditionally been solidly red, that could always be marked in the column for the Republicans, are sort of starting to trend maroon, if maybe not even a little bit purple. So you have younger families moving in, attracted by all the development that's been happening in the city. And with those younger families come generally more progressive ideas. They're more open to ideas about the LGBT community, marriage equality, abortion rights, some of those things that the red supporting voters have not been in favor of. So you see an interesting mix in this neighborhood, and the changes that these people say is the future for Oklahoma City, that we've lagged behind a lot of other major metropolitan cities in seeing this change, but slowly it's coming now to Oklahoma City.
And this precinct we looked at was basically the Belle Isle area of Oklahoma City, correct?
Right. Precinct 196, so it's basically between May and Western, Northwest Expressway and Northwest 63rd.
It's an interesting way of telling a story, going to a certain neighborhood and just talking with people and saying, hey, here's this topic, something that affects everyone. What are your thoughts?
And another interesting thing we've learned about this that we were talking about the other day was, in talking to a lot of voters in this precinct, the traditional wedge issues that have been used in campaigns, religion, abortion, the social issues, marriage equality, those kinds of things, very little discussion of those, very little. Voters don't even mention them, in fact. It's more about the country is going in the wrong direction, the people in charge don't know what they're doing, there has to be change, we need security. So it's a different kind of election here in Oklahoma. Like I said, it's not what the traditional battlegrounds have been fought over.
That coverage is coming out in Sunday's Oklahoman and online at newsok.com. Looking ahead to Super Tuesday, which of course is Tuesday, when Oklahomans can go to the polls and participate in some of the presidential balloting there. It's among a dozen states in play on Tuesday. We will have live coverage once the polls close, 7 p.m. right here from the Oklahomans video studio. Philip O'Connor of MSNBC fame will be among the cast of stars joining us here on the set. And we have a couple pollsters joining us as well, right?
Right. We have probably the two preeminent pollsters in the state. Pat McFerrin and Bill Shepard are going to be here to talk about and analyze the results as we get them. So I really think there's nobody better that we could have to sort of tell us what's going on and what it means.
There's a GOP watch party that night, and then Rubio has another watch party. The Democrats have watch parties as well. We'll be there. Our man in Washington, Chris Castile, will be joining in. So we'll have coverage across the metro, across the state of what's going on.
Right. We'll be out talking to voters, and we'll be out at all the election parties gathering comments from the folks there. So.
Our friend Brian Dean from the election board will be chiming in. It'll be good stuff. Joe Mixon, Sooner running back, got in some trouble at Pickleman's Cafe before his career ever started in Norman. Tape surfaced of an altercation there. Phil, where are we at? That bubbled back into the headlines this week.
Yeah, there was a decision by an appeals court judge that the trial court judge erred in ruling that the video should not be released. It's a big issue, I think, especially for us in the journalism field. It's a question of open records, and one that it's troubling, from my perspective. This is a tape that was played in court by a judge that was a central part of his decision making and how he would move forward with the case. And between the prosecutors and the judge, they've been able to manage being able to keep that out of the public eye. I don't know how a judge can sit on a bench, look at a video, make a ruling based on his viewing of the video, and then say that that is not part of the court record. And that is what this judge has done. I'm surprised at the ruling, and this could possibly end up with the Supreme Court. We'll see.
Could go to the state Supreme Court. Barry Trammell has written a very insightful column on this topic, and I'll read a little bit of this. He says at the end, "This isn't about Mixon. Release of the video is about keeping government accountable. We can't let public officials decide on their own who and what gets shielded. The Joe Mixon tape isn't about Joe Mixon. It's about open government."
Yeah. And I have the question, too. They shared it with officials from the University of Oklahoma. They allowed the football coach to look at it. They allowed the university president to look at it. They allowed the athletic director to look at it. But yet the public is not allowed to look at it. And I think that's a troubling issue. If this is our state court system, and what goes on in our state court system isn't a star chamber. The things that happen there are, that is the public's business. So I just find it really troubling that this video has not been released. And it doesn't have anything to do with Joe Mixon. It has to do with if it was you or me or any other person. I do question whether we'd be having this discussion. I don't think there'd be this effort to keep it behind.
Speaking of business, let's turn to some business news and energy companies. They released some earnings this week. We saw some layoffs recently. Don, what is the status of some of our local energy companies?
Well, I think a lot of people said after the earnings came out it could have been worse. It's still pretty stark. Devon lost over $2 billion in the last quarter, in the fourth quarter. Chesapeake lost over $2 billion. Continental lost only about $140 million, but still, that's a loss. And we saw these companies, as oil prices continue to stagnate around $30 a barrel, doing everything they can to preserve their cash. Devon has cut their drilling budget 75%. They cut their dividend that they pay to shareholders by 75%. They cut 1,000 employees. They laid off 20% of their workforce. Chesapeake cut their budget by almost 60%. Adam Wilmoth, our energy editor, wrote a very interesting column today about what Continental's doing in North Dakota, where they were just producing huge amounts of oil out of the Bakken. And these wells are very expensive. It costs up to $10 million to drill one of these wells. They are starting to drill the wells, and then they don't complete them. They don't produce the oil, and they're just going to wait. They're banking the oil that they know that's in the ground.
They're getting it ready for.
Right. They're still spending some to get the wells drilled. They're not completing the wells, and they want the price to come up probably beyond $40 before they start to produce the oil, because most of the oil production is in the first 2 years or so of a well. That's when you get the lion's share of that oil out of the ground. But the bad news for the local energy company and for the U.S. energy industry was when the oil minister of Saudi Arabia stood up in Houston this week and basically said, we don't have any plans to decrease our production. We can live with $30 oil. We can probably live with $20 oil. So that's not very optimistic looking forward. I mean, we're 20 months away now from $100 a barrel oil. This has been a much longer and more painful process than we thought it was going to be. But we keep seeing people say, well, at the end of this year or maybe in the middle of next year, we're going to start to see prices recover. We're not going to see it next month.
What about when the Iranian oil comes on the market?
Well,
isn't that going to drive it down again?
That's a problem too, and that's something we knew about that, and everyone's been anticipating that. And we also have millions, maybe billions of barrels of oil that are in storage in various places. Cushing, there's more oil in Cushing today than there has been almost any time. There's oil stored in all kinds of places all over the world. Continental is basically storing it in the ground in North Dakota, doing what I was talking about earlier. And when the prices start to recover, there's a concern that all this stored oil, oh, here goes the price, let's get it out on the market, and it's going to drive the price back down.
Way
again.
too much supply again.
What about lifting the export ban?
They did.
Okay, so
Yeah,
is that
that's
going to
done.
make that?
And we've started, there's been some tankers that have headed overseas, but the spread that you get between what you can sell your oil for in the United States and what you can sell it for overseas is not as great as it used to be. So, you know, there's costs associated with moving that oil, and then the price that you get isn't all that much greater. It is more, but it's not all that much greater than what you're getting here. It's a global market. It's a fungible commodity.
There it is. He got it in once again. Well played. What is the effect? Well, two questions for you. What could the effect be when you start to see more people in the workplace looking for work down here? What, as reporters and the business desk, will you guys be looking at?
Well, and we're very keen to what the impact is going to be on the broader economy. The problem that you have is you know, economic realities and economic numbers lag behind these kind of events. Richard Mize, our real estate editor, has already written a story. There was a lot of talk, particularly after the Devon layoffs, where we're going to see a lot of home short sales now because people are going to be upside down in their homes. They don't have a job anymore, and these expensive homes are going to fly onto the market and be short sold, which when you owe more than the house is worth. He's talked to some people who said we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that yet. Our latest employment numbers, which are from December, which was before the Devon layoffs and some other layoffs that we've reported on, still were quite good. So we're going to see an impact. We don't know how great that impact is going to be. It will affect the housing market, probably. It certainly is going to affect the employment market. Steve Lackmeyer, who covers downtown development, you know, and he's always tracking deals. The development deals that have already started, they're continuing. We haven't seen anybody pull the plug on any big thing, you know, the OG&E thing, which they hadn't broken ground on yet. That got pulled, the OG&E tower, but everything else seems to be going forward.
So just across the street, BOK Tower, that's still moving forward?
It's still moving forward. They're building as we speak. So that's an issue. We did see this week our first first local zombie oil company, which there's been a lot of talk about that, where we basically had Oklahoma City-based Post-Rock Energy disclose that we missed a debit payment that we owed on our loan. We do not have the money to make this payment or future payments, and they said the bank our creditors have full, you know, they can foreclose on us. They can take our assets, and they're not doing that because their assets aren't worth all that much. So they continue to operate as a company, and it's become that term zombie company, that they're dead. There's just nobody going to kick dirt on them yet. So, and they
The hope
still,
being that they would be able to turn it around
at
at
some point that maybe if the oil prices recover, they could get back in the game.
Creditors will make more money if they give them a little bit more time than if they shut them down.
They could actually start to produce some revenue, which they're not able to do right now, and they're not able to pay their debts. So, you know, it's a bad situation because it's lasted much longer than anybody anticipated when it first began, and it's going to continue for a while based on what we know now. But there still is that optimism, as there always is in this business. It's very cyclical. It always has been, and at some point it's going to come back. These large companies, Devon, Continental, you know, they can survive. They're not going away. And when the prices come back to a level that's profitable for them, they'll be doing great again. But we just don't know when that's going to happen.
You mentioned Steve Lackmeyer. He has some coverage coming up this weekend on an area called the Innovation District, which sounds brand new, but it's kind of relabeling a certain area that we've been covering for quite a while.
Yeah, it's basically what we call the Oklahoma Health Center, the OU Medical Center, the associated medical research buildings, and the OMRF is over there, the School of Science and Math, the Research Park, where there's a lot of startup companies. Brookings Institute is looking at that whole area. It's just east of downtown, but it's kind of disconnected from downtown. It's also disconnected from the neighborhoods around it. It's not really conducive to walking. It's not pedestrian friendly. It's lots of open space, lots of parking lots, and office buildings. So the Brookings Institute is doing an 18-month study here in Oklahoma City. They're also doing one in Philadelphia, and they're trying to create these innovation districts. And we've seen some places that have done things like this, that have really connected it with the local neighborhoods, connected it with vibrant areas and other places, and they're hoping to do that for this newly dubbed Innovation District.
That's interesting. The area that he's talking about is roughly northeast 4th up to northeast 13th, Robinson on the west, and then to the east a little bit south of the Capitol, basically, and then that medical complex. Old historic neighborhood, which is a cool neighborhood. It'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Yeah, and Steve's writing extensively about this for the Sunday Oklahoma, and we'll have that in paper and on the website.
Very good. That is coming up Sunday. Also coming up Sunday, the Oscars will be handed out, the Academy Awards. You can watch on ABC at 6 p.m. Your host is Chris Rock. At this point, I'm going to ask these gentlemen their nominations, their picks, their choices for Best Picture.
I've seen exactly 2 of the nominated pictures.
And there's 8 for Best Picture,
yeah,
so you've seen 2.
Although I really want to see The Big Short. I've heard great things about that, and that's kind of in my field. But I've seen Spotlight and The Martian. I liked them both. Between those 2, I'd vote for Spotlight, because any movie where journalists are the heroes, that comes along about once in a generation. So.
Yeah, I think I'm like Don. I think I've only seen 2. I've seen Spotlight and I've seen The Big Short, and they were both great films. I'm with Don. It's the best journalism film since All the President's Men.
Maybe better than All the President's Men.
Maybe better.
There you go. All right, the Oscars are coming up Sunday night. Our Brandy McDonald and Nathan Poppy will have extensive coverage. Brandy will be live tweeting throughout the night. Be sure to follow her. And, of course, there'll be coverage in Monday's Oklahoman and online at newsok.com. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for that and the analysis. Have a great weekend, everybody.